Our next item is the overview of the override and bond advisory committee, also a study item. Mr. Green.
Thank you, President Pratt and members of the board. I'm going to jump on presentation. I announced in early February the study item in February that we were considering the need to reauthorize the maintenance and operation override, and also take a look at our capital needs across the district and what might be needed in regards to a capital bond. As a part of that process, pulled together a large community group consisted of parents, community members, and staff. We invited 60, pretty much roughly split into those categories. And in every meeting we had about 50 attendants. So it was a large group of folks that were there. Two things, most of the parents were associated with site council, so they were elected as representatives by their respective communities, by the school communities to participate. There were others that were a part of that. That wasn't enough parent representation, so we invited others into that process to make sure that we had good representation. It was acknowledged, though, that people who were on that committee were probably involved in schools and had some biases. And so we just talked about the norms of the process. We met over a series of 3 meetings total, probably close to between 7 and 8 hours of time that they invested, not to mention time they invested in reading all of my emails and background material prior to the meetings. But part of the, I just put this norms process for that up there for people to see. But I think the most important one is, what would your neighbor think? Really, people, they were highly engaged, but I also wanted them to think about not just what their thoughts were, but what about the thoughts of their neighbors on the street or block who don't have children? What would that perspective look like? So we dove in to that process. At the same time that we began this process, we also engaged with a consulting firm who did some community polling to get some information, and then we were able to bring that to the last meeting. So it wasn't just a group that was represented making some considerations, helping inform me on what recommendation to bring. And I also want to be clear, the purpose of bringing this committee together was to help me formulate recommendations to bring forward to you. So that's where that's at. So the first meeting, we really spent time just going over the process, but diving into the override itself. What is an override? What's the purpose? So just quickly, in case there's people online watching, I just want to make sure I'm clear. Override reauthorization, we are currently operating on a 12.5% maintenance and operation override. The maximum amount that a school district can ask for is 15%. As an example, this past November, TUSD asked for and their community approved a 15% override. We're not asking, that's not what we're on, and that's not what we're asking to move forward. It's just simply a reauthorization. If we don't reauthorize, the override has to be reauthorized every 5 years, or it begins to phase down in thirds. If we don't do that November 26, the programs that the funding supports will begin to fade away in 1/3, and the tax that provides that funding will fade away in commensurate amounts. So key timeline, must vote on the measure by the end of June. To put that on the November ballot. So what is an override? It's just local approved funding above that state base level that I just talked about in the previous agenda item. We get a base support level that we can't spend above that. What override simply means is you can go above that base amount by whatever percentage. In our case, it's 12.5%. For us, that currently is, and we, by the way, provide transparency around what we use to override. Every October, or roughly thereabouts, we do a public, we bring a report on the override funding to the board for the purpose of being transparent about it. But for us, that's about a $14 million amount currently. So if you think about the $142 million budget that I just talked about, of that $142 million, $14 million of it is provided by the override. So what does that override provide? Well, it can only be spent in the maintenance and operation, functionally on people. For us, that is comprised of teachers and some supplies. And the other key factor, Vail has been operating on an override. The community has supported the reauthorization of some form of an override every 5-ish years since 1993. So what does it fund? Functionally, funds programs for students beyond the basics. Without the override funding, it's hard for us to provide the basics. So things like art, music, PE, gifted, AP, advanced courses, and class size. So it keeps our class sizes smaller than they otherwise would be. It funds somewhere between 72 and 73 teachers who provide those services to kids. For us, that's about 20% of our teaching staff. This last override, actually the last two overrides, there's a base amount of about $1.5 million that goes towards salaries for everybody but non-administrative staff. That's current. If we reauthorize it, we can take that amount and simply put it into programs. Doesn't have to, whatever we stated in that amount that's what we stated in the amount to voters last time. You could take that amount and simply apply it to positions next time. So just something to talk about. So that's what the override does, what it funds. We talked about that. The next meeting, we spent time talking about a bond and the bond needs. So bonds where override provides programs supported by people. Bonds support stuff, growth, buildings, equipment, that kind of thing. Our last bond was 2018, so 8 years ago. At the conclusion, I'll talk about that in a moment, of Saguaro Creek really was the last of our use of our bond funds. Historically, we've used bond funds to help us with student enrollment growth and what that looks like. So you can see that was the agenda for meeting 2 and recap what we looked at relative to that. So how do we do on our 2018 bond? It was just under $62 million was what the community funded last time. You can see the categories: the technology, construction, health and safety, transportation, and some administrative functions, which were, I believe, some of the also related to some technology components. Oh, the administrative functions, I know what it was facilities for transportation, because any non-school building construction has to be labeled administrative functions. And so we added to the maintenance of the bus barn, the ability for additional mechanics bays and some expansions there. So that's what that's about for. But you can see, we said we told the community we were going to do these things. In essence, we've done all of them. There's, when you see about 2.5 million in progress regarding health and safety, those are just some remaining things like fire suppression and some systems that we're working with insurance on, and some other grant programs to be able to leverage the remaining amount. So all of it's encumbered and it's in the process. So we asked the community for the funding for these categories, and we delivered on them. I think primarily, you think about new growth, built Micah Mountain High School, Saguaro Creek, K-8, did an expansion at Vail Academy in high school, did an expansion at Andrada High School. So those were all kind of big ticket items relative to that. So where are we now in regards to capital needs? We've been working for the last year and a half on building what are kind of compiling a facilities plan and capital needs plan. To put it in context, our total capital budget for the entire school district is just $10 million. So when you think that we have about 26 facilities, over 1 million square feet under roof, I can't remember how many acres we have to maintain. $10 million doesn't go very far when you have to purchase computers and also software and licensing out of that bucket. So we have somewhere around $2 million that we can put back into schools out of that $10 million. So when we're looking at a total need, we're really looking at kind of 3 key areas: safety and security, the learning environment, and growth and new construction. You can see kind of what some projects look like relative to that. We're looking at an amount somewhere around $130 million to help cover some of those things. Some of the big projects would be for growth, expansion of Micah Mountain and Saguaro Creek. That's where, when we need growth space, that's where we anticipate that will happen. And then we just have a whole lot of upgrades to classrooms, classroom buildings, some renovation of learning spaces, gymnasiums, and deferred maintenance catch-ups and those kinds of things. And then on the safety side, things like, it's not sexy stuff, but fire panels and HVAC systems. Frankly, the state should be helping us with those things. They're not. Updated security cameras and access control at all of our schools, and some communications upgrades. So those are kind of the buckets of pieces of building. You can see, I just pulled, we did this for every school. I showed the committee kind of what it looks like for a school. This is Acacia Elementary School. It's our one of our oldest schools. You can see the categories of things that are there, things like door locks and weatherization, which is painting, and weatherization, sealing of the building so that you don't get mold and those kinds of things in there. Roofing, portable and renovation, renovation or replacement of modular buildings, which is a big number, but those portables are over 30 years old. Facility like Acacia, you can get a sense for what that looks like. Just Acacia alone, we're looking at kind of a low cost to a high cost average, and of what it is to do those projects, somewhere in the neighborhood of $9.5 million. So when we asked the committee kind of what's your, if you had to rank how to do those things as far as a sense of urgency, you can see what they ranked them as. And the reason that growth in new space isn't urgent is that we're watching growth. We just opened Saguaro Creek. So when we say urgency, we're probably at a minimum 4 to 5 years out before we need new space. Whereas kind of those other two, I think, maybe felt that we're on a more urgent basis, needing to be able to address first. So I just want to pop through a couple of slides regarding the polling results that we received from partners who did that work. There were 434 respondents. And, the professional polling group knows what our demographics are based by voter groups and by age. You can see what that looks like. Frankly, so there were 42% were Republicans, 29 Democrats, 29% independents, about a 50-50 split male, female, and then also by age range. High efficacy, so those that were polled are high efficacy voters, so those that vote in every election, and often also vote in primary elections. So it's a good sample size. So what did the overall top line say? Well, good news is that how do you feel about the Vail School District? 76% had a favorable response to who we are as a school district versus 11% unfavorable, 12% no opinion. Overall, at education quality, 57% said totally satisfied. Now remember, a lot of those group of people don't have school-age children. If you So it's not, this isn't a parent survey, this is a community survey. Totally satisfied with quality, 10% dissatisfied, 11% neutral. And then this is where it gets interesting. And I think I've been in our community a long time, and I've done a lot of elections in our community. I think this is telling. I wasn't surprised by this. So we really like you. You're doing a decent job. When you asked me, would you vote yes for the two measures, right off the bat, about 36% yes, 31% no, and about 33% unsure. That's with no messaging. It's just kind of no more information than would you vote for that. So that's where we are relative to that. And then when you pull apart, I think this is a slide for us to pay attention to. The next question, if you said you would vote yes for those things, and you were could only support one of the two, which one, there was about an 8-point difference in support of the bond versus the override. So I think that's something to pay attention to if we're looking at asking for the two questions on the same ballot. We consider that. And as you remember, the override supports programs for students and the people who support those programs, and bond supports capital infrastructure. So when the pollsters asked which areas would you like to most see focused on, class offerings like art, music, PE, advanced courses, things around student behavior. So for us, how are we helping with that, counselor? Those kinds of programs for kids that engage them. Academic performance, school safety, extracurricular activities, you can see all of those things. Class sizes is another one that was up there. Things that receive the least amount of support are things that would be supported by capital needs. So I think there's just a lot of voter education that needs to happen about what is the difference between a bond and an override. It's an overwhelming support for things that an override does provide for our community. Also, where should the funds go? Teacher retention, expanded extracurricular activities. So kind of falls into that. So key takeaways from the polling: strong foundation, but there's some soft support. There's a lot of unsure voters, about a third. The messaging around an override, in other words, programs for kids to provide a well-rounded education, resonate really well. The issue that it wouldn't raise taxes. Neither of these questions would raise the property tax rate. In fact, I'll talk about that in a moment. Was an effective part of the message. Where there's some vulnerabilities is what's fiscally accountable. I think just general mistrust of government, but be transparent around that. People have questions. I think when people hear override, flip of that is, well, why don't you just live within your means versus how do those funds provide something beyond a basic education, which is where that resides. And then if this were to win, the target group is Republican and independent unsure voters. So we talked a lot about tax rates also with our committee, and I just want to show this. So this is a scenario. I've got two scenarios. One, if we were to do both an override election and renewal of the override and a bond election at the same time of $135 million, what would happen to our property tax rate? And you can see that our current tax rate, which is all a secondary tax rate, is $2.84 per $100 of assessed valuation. So to put that into, of which our current bond repayment is $1.26, and the override is $1.58. That's why you come up with $2.84. Even if we were to move forward with the reauthorization of the 12.5% override and the bond, in any combination of 26, 27, or 28, our combined tax rate will go down. And you can see that here on the column from 284 in this scenario to 267, 253, 242, and so on. I'm just giving another example of what that would look like if we did an override election in 26 and then a bond election in 28. We've got it modeled for 27 also. You can see buck 84, or 284, 267, 253, and so on. So both of those things would be the tax rate would continue to go down. Why? There's two reasons for that. One, I just talked budget piece. We're expecting student growth of about 1.5%, but we're seeing assessed valuation in our community grow at about 8%. So we're the tax body is growing at a faster pace than our student body growth. When there's a larger tax base and fewer students, that model goes down. Also, we're just not asking for as much. We're fiscally responsible for how we're doing that. We're not asking what the 12.5% funding provided 10 years ago. When you think about, when we just talked about a 3.4% inflationary increase this year, it's less. So we're absorbing that less in what we're doing. So we're being fiscally responsible. Tax base is growing faster than our student growth. So we're modeling those amounts. Somebody's paying attention. What does 284 in our secondary property tax rate look like? Well, if you think of your typical house, it's not, if you look it up on Zillow, there's an amount you can sell it for. And then if you look up your tax bill, there's a limited assessed value, or sometimes it's called a limited value. So that's the amount that we're assessed on. So it's a limited assessed valuation. It can only go up 10%. It can't go up more than that year over year. So I would say that probably average home in Vail is somewhere between, has a limited assessed value, somewhere between $250,000 and $300,000, roughly. It's for every $100 of assessed valuation. So if you had a $100,000 house, your amount would be $284 per year. You'd be responsible for. It's a $300,000 house assessed valuation, just times that amount by 3. So what did the committee say? We pulled them at the end, and it was overwhelming to pursue a budget override reauthorization. Timing, almost the majority said November 26. So pursue a bond election. Yes, they think we need to pursue a bond election, almost unanimous. Pursuing a bond election. Timing on the bond was really mixed. You can see what that looks like. Some felt that we should go in 26. More thought that either November 20, some thought 27. So combine those. 16 said November 26, 26 said sometime later. Should they both be on the same or separate ballot? Lean towards the separate ballot. So the takeaway from the committee recommendation is that to me, again, is to pursue a budget override in November of 26 to reauthorize that. Again, that would be a tax rate increase, in fact, moderate decrease, and then pursue a bond. For me to bring forward a recommendation to the board to pursue a bond sometime between November 26th and November 28th, but not later. So that's what I have. It's an overall process. I know, thank you for the latitude to do that, but I wanted to be able to do that, in a regularly scheduled agenda item on that. And so happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Are there any board members who have a question? Ms. Tippett.
Just wanted to thank the community members that participated in the committee, taking their time to kind of digest all of the information and give us some feedback. on the information, what we're working on as a community and as a school district. Their feedback is really valuable as we move forward in making in considering making these decisions. And just to appreciate the additional data that the school district gathered to help us make decisions. So thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Tippett. I agree. It's probably one of the most engaging or engaged committees I've been on. So I think you've done a really great job. Thank you for pointing that out. Any other comments or questions? No. All right, we will move on then. Our next agenda item, D, is textbooks for public display. This first one, we're going to have several. The first one is Principles of Business 10E.